Okay, so what I'm working on right now is an extremely rare keyboard from the early 1980s, although similar to a model that came out in the late 70s. This is what IBM refers to as a Spring Beam keyboard. Spring Beam having to do with the patented technology and the way the key actually springs up from a clicking mechanism, and I'll show that in a later step. But you can actually hear it makes a very unique sound. I personally think it's a very cool sound, and I'm really looking forward to an eventual conversion going down, happening down the way, where I can actually convert this to USB and see if I can actually hook it up to a modern computer. But anyway, that's what the inside or the outside of this keyboard looks like, and I've cleaned up the case to the best of my ability. I didn't use any retro brighting, just because my experience in the past that with retro brighting it can make an IBM case way too bright. And if you're familiar with IBM equipment, you know that it was really an off-white, almost a cream beige color, so we don't want to make it too bright. Okay, so these are the internal parts of the Spring Beam keyboard, and you can see up here along the top, this is the little circuit board that's responsible for handling all of the data returned from pressing these keys. And there's this piece right here that can be uninstalled and replaced with a modern circuit board that allows you to hook it up to USB. And those are going on eBay right now for about $80 a piece. I'm really hoping for a cheaper alternative, and I'm going to scour the web a little bit for that. But in the short term, I'm going to at least get the keyboard all cleaned up. And what I'm going to do in order to clean it up here in phase 2, now that the outside of the case is cleaned up, is I'm going to use a, boy, it's a DIP for a dual inline package ROM chip. This is a DIP memory puller. Sorry, DIP chip puller. And so what I'm doing here is I'm going around each key, getting in there as best as I can, and then really beginning to pull these keys up. I'll come back here in a second and show you what this key looks like. This is really kind of a two-hand job here. It works is you just pull up on the actual key itself, and it comes out pretty not quite nicely. And we don't want to use a screwdriver to do this, because doing so could do damage to the plastic. It can also damage the plastic molded depression there that fits over the actual spring itself. And so one of these little DIP chip puller is really inexpensive and worth it if you're going to do any kind of restorations in this area. So now that I've got the key out, we can really get down in there and look and see what is a beam spring key look like. You can literally see there is a spring here. So the name Beam Spring, not just a clever name that they patented, but literally there's a spring underneath here. They did have a little bit of a material underneath here, I'm sure probably to soften a little bit of the sound itself. But as I kind of get around and clear this out with a brush, this will actually clean up quite nicely. I do not have replacement springs. I'm not even sure how hard it would be to get replacement springs, so I'm really hoping that's not going to be an issue, that these springs are going to be good enough as is, at least for what I'm going to use it for, which if I can't find that special card, this may be all for show and just bragging rights that I have one of these antiques. But you can see got quite a bit of cleaning to do here. Literally, this thing has been sitting in someone's basement for the better part of 40 years. So a very long time. Let me correct that. Probably 30 years to be more accurate. The keyboard itself is only about 40 years old. So about 30 years of sitting in a basement. And so my goal here is really to go through and clean all of this up, and then see if I can make this look like as pretty a package as possible. Okay, stay tuned. Okay, so I've spent roughly about 10 minutes or so taking off all of these keys, and I will tell you, you want to be very careful with these. I did have one bracket underneath, I think one of the return keys, where part of it looked like it may have broken underneath. So it will not show any wear or damage once the key is installed, but it's just a matter of, is it going to fasten properly? So we're going to have to find out on that. But since running into that problem, I was much more careful on all of the other keys. One of the things that I'm going to point out to you, and this is something I've run into working on a couple of Apple IIs. I worked on an Apple IIe and an Apple IIc and a 2 Plus. And what I've learned with all these keyboards is that the trickiest key to work on is always the spacebar key, and it's because they typically have a long rod that allows you to press anywhere on the keyboard, and then it automatically makes the connection on the springs. And so you not only want to take pictures of the before and the during, but the after, so that when you go to reinstall it, you do not have to, learn the unique way that keyboard key goes on, because it is the trickiest one of all of the keys. So I'm going to do that, and then I'm going to give the whole top a clean, and then I'm going to clean up all of these pieces using some light dial soap and let them dry. Okay, so at this point I have cleaned and let each one of these keys soak thoroughly in a very lightweight composition of dial, hand washing or dishwashing soap, and a lot of water. I just let them soak for a while. After soaking for I'd say about 10 minutes or so, then I took a toothbrush and really scrubbed gently. This is a soft bristle toothbrush. I really went around and brushed all four sides of these keys. And I learned from another owner of a Spring Beam keyboard from IBM that these keys are made from a different type of plastic than the keyboards that came out in the late 80s. Maybe like the Type M keyboard or the Type F that was made by IBM, or even certainly the keys that were made in the Apple II series. A lot of those types of keys were coated with a certain type of plastic that was susceptible to the fluorescent lighting, and it made the keys turn just a hideous yellowish color. You can retro bright and try to get a lot of that out, but it's time consuming. And one of the nice things about this early keyboard from IBM is that they did not use that type of plastic or that type of coating. So these keys, once cleaned, are going to look really like brand new. There is no light fading from these. They look exactly like some of the historical photos that I have seen online. One of the other nice things I like about these keys while we look at them is that unlike some of the keys made in the Type M and the Type Fs from IBM or the Apple II series, is that these keys are very smooth plastic. They do not have a rough texture as the other keyboards do, and I believe probably that was part design to make the keys look textured and kind of give them more of a an aesthetic appeal to them. But the downside to that is it gave more surface areas for dust and dirt and oil to hide on those keys, and it makes scrubbing and getting them clean very difficult. Whereas, as you can imagine, with a very smooth plastic surface, it's extremely easy with the toothbrush to take all of that dirt off. So again, these keys are shining and glistening just like they came off the assembly line. Okay, so my step now is to let all of these keys dry, and then tomorrow I'm going to come back and tackle the rest of the hardware of the keyboard. So I'm going to try to get and clean all of these beam springs and latches, get them all good and clean, get rid of the extra material. This was a coating protective membrane that they put on the chassis of the keyboard, but it is deteriorated to a point to where it's not salvageable. Frankly, I'm not sure how useful that material was. It's not replaceable. I'm not going to find this material anywhere. So all of that is going to come out of that keyboard. And then you can see, I mean, it's a type of stainless steel there, I believe, and so it's going to shine up really nicely. And so then I might try to touch up down here, make sure I get all the dirt out. I'm going to take this piece of hardware off and make sure that there's no dirt trapped underneath it and it's clean. And then from there, really, it's reassembly. I'll reassemble the keyboard, and then we'll see whether or not I can find that modern circuit board that allows me to connect it to USB. If not, one of the final videos I have in this series will actually just show you this keyboard looking brand new as it would have been unboxed from IBM. Okay, so here in our next phase, I'm going to work here to remove this little membrane material here and get it out of the way. And then also go to each of these springs and remove this little material that was placed around each one of the springs. I'm going to just completely remove it. What I'm going to use for that is just some old-fashioned painting tools here. I've got some brushes of various sizes that I'm going to use to just very delicately get in here and wipe it loose. And then I'll do a quick vacuum after that. I'm not entirely sure what this material is that I'm going to be removing. and I don't need to be ingesting it or swallowing it either. And so one of the things I always tell my students is that if you're trying to remove dust, don't use your breath to blow the dust out of the way, because you're just going to make it airborne, and then you're going to end up swallowing it. And while dust is gross, it's made up largely of our skin and dirt, I don't actually know what this is made up of, and so I certainly do not want to breathe that in. So that's where I'm going to bring in some protective gear here, just a ventilator that I can use that's going to go through and filter out the debris that could be airborne. I also have in my shop, I'm going to let you see my shop here, I've got a ceiling mounted ventilator up there that's going to go through and pull a good quantity of the dust that's in the air, and it's going to filter that through a filter. So I've got all of that going on at the same time. So I'll come back in a few minutes and show you what progress I've made. Okay, I just wanted to kind of stop at the halfway point and show you what progress I've made. That film material is coming off very easily. The blue film material around each of the spring beams themselves, a little more challenging. Not that the material is necessarily any tougher to move than this, it's just that it is caught on each one of the locking mechanisms for each one of the keys. So that'll take me just a little bit longer. And there we have it, one cleaned up spring beam keyboard. Now we're not entirely finished. I'm kind of jumping ahead of the gun here because I'm excited, but you can see I've gotten rid of as much of that membrane as possible. There are still maybe some tiny specks of blue here and there that's really adhered to the steel springs, but for the most part that is looking pretty good. Everything there is cleaned up. My next step really is going to be to peek underneath this keyboard to see if there's any more dirt or debris that I need to remove before we reassemble. Okay, so not too bad really, just a little vacuuming should do it. If I were a super perfectionist, I would maybe try to find a similar paint and try to get rid of a little bit of these early stages of rust in here. But this is a part that's not exposed. It's no longer going to be in a cool, damp basement. And really, I want to keep this as original as possible without the fear of using a wrong color and that being visible. So I'd like to try to keep things as natural as possible, as long as I don't think the rust is going to become an even bigger problem down the road, which I don't anticipate it being. So we're going to clean this up, and then we're down to the fun part, which is reassembly. I thought this was a really cool bit of history that I discovered in here, but this is actually the inspector's tag that's been attached to this particular keyboard upon assembly. And so probably someone along the assembly line would come by and check to make sure this keyboard met IBM's extremely strict specifications, and then they would attach this label here showing when it was inspected and on what date and then what part this is. So I thought that was really pretty cool. You can see that this spring beam was made September 12th, 1980. So just kind of giving you an exact date as to when this guy was getting ready to roll off the assembly line. And it's a unique piece of, it's not even paper, it's really almost like a masking tape or a burlap that they used here. But you can see this thing is almost entirely made out of metal and high quality plastic. I don't think there's a single keyboard on the market today that is made this well out of such really nice materials. Okay, I've got the spring beam keys and the tray that it sits on secured back to the chassis of the keyboard case itself. I'm going to have to pull out a picture now that I took at the very beginning of this disassembly and restoration to see where some of these keys go. This is an early model IBM keyboard, so let's not lose track of that as we reassemble, because some of these keys are unique to this keyboard, and they're not on modern keyboards today. This isn't, you know, your typical 104 key keyboard. It really wasn't until that Model F or that Model M that really sets a standard for what keys go on a keyboard. If you don't believe me, go back and look at the Commodore PET or even the Apple II series. Some unique keys. Keyboard layouts were not even remotely standard at this point yet. That's really where the IBM personal computer first generation really sets that keyboard standard that is just adopted even to today on modern keyboards. So I'm going to go through now and reassemble all of these keys, and we'll be ready to put the case back on the top. Okay, so here it is in all its glory, completely reassembled, flaws and all. We've got to put back together. I have a whole new appreciation for this keyboard, and I'll point out something that I wasn't really even expecting. And maybe, real keyboard collectors are going to say, yeah, duh, Mark, everybody knows this, but I didn't know this. And maybe it's unique to this keyboard, maybe it's not. But when I was putting the keys back, I noticed that the top keys are beveled towards the top. And what I mean by that is that they are not angled at 90 degrees. You can see that the bottom part here has more of, or actually it has less of the key, so it's actually facing more upward. And it's more 90 degrees on the back side, so it's designed to be facing you and actually leans a little bit towards you. And then as you get to the bottom keys, they're the opposite. And so the key actually sticks out a little bit more on the bottom side than it does on the top side. So I'll go up here and I'll show you. You can see these top keys actually angle more towards the top, and they're a little taller on top. And then the opposite is true as you go down. Making it to where the keys actually feel a little bit better and are actually reaching your finger if you're on the top as opposed to the bottom. So the keyboard is actually, almost like a football field in reverse. It's crowned, but going convex instead of concave. So I thought that was pretty interesting that was the case. One of the other things I spent more time looking at is just some of these unique keys. Some of them have survived to modern keyboards, and they put them right on the original PC, but we have an early version of a print screen key here. Here's your insert key, system requirements key, which we still see on modern keyboards with the print screen key, even though we don't use it. You've got some tab keys in here. The tilde key, which is not used that often, but you can see this is one of the first keyboards to actually have a tilde. You scroll across and you look at some of the keys that are on top of the numbers. What the heck is that on top of number 6? That's pretty interesting. But the rest of these look pretty similar. Here's your hyphen key, your equals key. We have another key up here, so I'm wondering, is that a backspace key? Maybe. And if that's a backspace key, then what is this one? This one maybe clears the entire line back, and maybe this is one character at a time. Don't know the answer, I'm just kind of speculating. You've got this key over here. This is DUP, which I'm guessing is for duplicating. I don't know if that's a key that we would use today for Control-C for copying and pasting. Not really sure. You can see we have the beginning of a number pad. I mean, there are keyboards that come with new iMacs today that don't even come with a number pad. So something that we got used to at the earliest IBM PCs, the PC and the XT and the AT had that Type M keyboard, which had a number pad over on the right, which is really nice if you enter a lot of numbers on a regular basis, so you don't have to constantly go to the top row. We look along the bottom again, spacebar, pretty typical, but it's like, I'm guessing these are the predecessor to the Shift key on either side of the keyboard. I'm guessing this is caps lock up and down. First I thought I had this key installed incorrectly, but I had to go back and look at my picture from the beginning, and it's the right way, and it's beveled the right way, so I don't know if that's caps lock up and down. You can see some unique keys down here. These have actually been merged into really different keys today. So you've got a comma, and I'm guessing that is for an apostrophe. So those were on the same key back then. You've got a period, and I'm not sure really what we're looking at here with this period above for shift. Not quite sure what that one does. Question mark still there, and colon, semicolon key. You can see that's there. So definitely some interesting keys here that are that survived onto newer keyboards, and some that clearly have been removed. So anyway, this was really a joy to work on. This IBM Spring Beam keyboard, really we've gone back to 1980, 1981, and it is ready for all of us to view. Thanks for joining us. I hope you enjoyed kind of watching step by step, bringing this piece of history back to life. Many of these probably are in scrap yards or in landfills, and this one is going to get to survive. And this is something I'm going to kind of treasure, even if I don't get it fully functioning to work with a modern PC. It's really cool just to know that I have a Spring Beam keyboard. and you can see why it gets its name. The keys make that popping sound, and that was a patented design from IBM. While I'm on that, before I wrap up here, I do want to mention that if you don't know your history of IBM, I'd recommend taking a look at a documentary called Triumph of the Nerds. But that documentary really shows just how serious IBM was in the very beginning days of getting into the PC industry. IBM International Business Machines, this was primarily a calculator company. And then they got into mainframes with reel-to-reel. And then they started getting into systems like this one here, where you would actually have a big terminal box right in front of it, and it would connect to a mainframe. And IBM decided that they would get into the PC market. You know, the Apple II coming out in 1978, IBM was very secretive about this project. Very few employees were even privileged enough to know that IBM was producing a computer, and many of its employees that weren't directly involved with this project didn't even know they were coming out with a PC until it was officially mentioned and mentioned on the stock trading floor. And it was announced in various PC magazines. So this keyboard right here really begins it all, even though we're used to seeing more of the Type M. So again, just wanted to mention that little nugget of history. I want to thank you all for joining me in restoring this IBM Spring Beam keyboard. I hope you'll check back later for future projects that I've got lined up. Take care, everybody.